August 6, 1943. The hills above Troina, Sicily. The air smells of cordite, scorched olive trees, and blood that has baked dry in the Mediterranean sun. For 6 days and 6 nights, the men of the U.S. 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One, have hurled themselves against one of the most savagely defended hilltop towns in the entire war. The Germans are dug into ancient stone, firing from positions so well concealed that American artillery barely scratches them. Men are dying by the hundreds. And yet, they break through. Troina falls. The Germans retreat. The Big Red One wins what military historians will later call one of the most brutally contested engagements of the entire Mediterranean campaign. And the very next day, the men who led them to that victory received their termination papers. Not a court-martial, not a formal hearing, a mailbag, stuffed in between routine dispatches and logistical memos, like a notice from a landlord, like you don't matter, like what you just survived doesn't matter. You are fired. Please vacate the premises. Now, before you dismiss that as bureaucratic cold-bloodedness, before you assume these men must have done something wrong, let me ask you the question this story is really about. Why does a system fire its most successful leaders in the middle of a war it is desperately trying to win? That is the question. And the answer, God help us, tells us everything about power, about excellence, and about the price the exceptional always pay for being too good at things the system cannot fully control. To understand what happened, you need to understand who these men were. Because they weren't generals cut from the standard institutional mold. They were something rarer, something the Army simultaneously needed and feared. Major General Terry de la Mesa Allen. West Point threw him out. Twice actually, or near enough. He scraped through with one of the lowest academic records in the institution's history, the kind of performance that was supposed to produce mediocrity and obscurity. Instead, it produced a man who studied war the way a musician studies music, not to pass a test, but because it consumed him. In the First World War, a German bullet shattered his jaw. It never healed right. He spoke for the rest of his life with a slight, involuntary hiss, a permanent whisper of the front lines living inside his voice. That wound didn't break him. It defined him. He became a man who understood at a cellular level that war is not a theory. War is a jaw that doesn't close properly in the morning. Allen hated garrison duty, hated inspections, hated the theater of it, the polished boots and pressed creases and salutes performed for generals visiting from the rear. In his mind, the only salute that mattered was the one you gave when you led men toward the fire, not away from it. Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt, Jr. The name alone was a weight most men would have buckled under. Son of the most volcanic president in American history. Born into wealth, educated at Harvard, a banker and author in civilian life. He could have spent the war in a comfortable uniform behind a comfortable desk, trading on the family mythology. Instead, he showed up to North Africa looking, by all contemporary accounts, like a walking disaster. Cane in hand because of crippling arthritis, heart quietly failing, uniform perpetually rumpled, face perpetually grinning. His soldiers adored him. Not because he was a Roosevelt, because he was there. He rode a battered jeep he called Rough Rider, prowling the front lines, talking to privates by name, appearing in the exact places generals are not supposed to appear, the places where the killing actually happens. When George Marshall, the Army's chief of staff, paired these two men together to command the Big Red One, he was doing something quietly brilliant. He was matching a tactical genius with a human flamethrower. Allen's cold, precise mind for night attacks and battlefield geometry fused with Roosevelt's incandescent ability to make ordinary men feel like they could walk through artillery fire and come out the other side. Together, they built something that was less a military division and more a warring tribe. The Big Red One in 1943 was, by any reasonable measure, the finest combat division the United States Army had ever fielded to that point. El Guitar, Tunisia, March 1943. Allen's men absorb a German armored assault, hold their ground, and counterattack with a ferocity that stuns Rommel's veterans. The 1st Division becomes the unit that proves American soldiers can fight. Really fight. Not just die bravely, but win. And something happens to a unit when it wins like that. It develops an identity, a mythology, a contempt, earned and dangerous, for everyone who wasn't there. The Big Red One soldiers began referring to the rest of the Army as the others. Rear echelon troops were not fellow Americans. They were obstacles, soft men playing soldier while real soldiers bled. In the wine shops of Oran, the bars of Algiers, the piazzas of Sicily, 1st Division men rioted, brawled, refused to salute officers from other units, looted, swaggered through occupied towns like conquerors, which technically they were. Allen and Roosevelt knew. They didn't fully condone it, but they understood something profound about men who have stared into the abyss and come back, something the bureaucrats in the rear simply could not process. You cannot ask a man to kill for you on Monday and expect him to button his collar on Saturday. Allen's response to disciplinary complaints was often a variation on the same theme. These men fight like lions. Let them rest like lions. The war will call them back soon enough. And it always did. But for Omar Bradley, newly appointed commander of the 2nd Corps, this was intolerable. Bradley was brilliant, no one serious disputes that, but he was a different kind of brilliant. Organizational, systematic. He was building an army that could function across thousands of miles of supply lines, hundreds of thousands of men, complex inter-allied politics. He needed manageable leaders, leaders who could inspire but also obey, leaders who filed the right reports, attended the right meetings, saluted the right people. Allen and Roosevelt were not those men. And Bradley was not the first powerful person in history to discover that the best tool for a specific job is often the worst fit for the institution that deploys it. The decision to relieve them crystallized in the aftermath of Gela, Sicily, July 1943. German tanks reached the beach. Chaos. In the confusion, a 1st Division unit fires on American paratroopers, dropping from the sky, killing dozens in a friendly fire catastrophe. The incident is harrowing. It is also, in the cold mathematics of blame, convenient. Patton, who privately loved Allen's ferocity, ultimately deferred. Eisenhower, who knew both men's worth, made the calculation. The institution required a demonstration. The institution required that no one was bigger than the institution. And so, the morning after Troina, after the hardest-won victory of the Sicilian campaign, a mailbag arrived at the 1st Division command post. Read the orders. Thank you for your service. You are relieved. There were no hearings. There was no official censure. In fact, and this is the detail that should stop you cold, both men had received glowing efficiency reports right up until the moment of their dismissal. Superiors on record praising their combat effectiveness, their leadership, their results. The official record said, "Excellent." The mailbag said, "Goodbye." That contradiction is not an accident. That contradiction is how institutions protect themselves. You don't fire the hero in front of the crowd. You write the hero a beautiful letter, and then you quietly change the locks. Here is where history stops being a tragedy and becomes something closer to a myth. Terry Allen went home. He was humiliated, publicly, visibly, stripped of the division he had built into a legend. A lesser man would have broken. Instead, Allen went to Camp Carson, Colorado, and was handed a division of raw recruits and told to make something of them. The 104th Infantry Division, the Timberwolves. And here, Allen did something extraordinary. He enforced strict discipline, parade ground discipline, garrison discipline, the exact kind of spit and polish adherence that his critics at the 1st Division had accused him of being incapable of. And simultaneously, he trained his men in the art of night warfare, relentless, aggressive, disorienting night attacks that would become the Timberwolves' signature. By the time they reached Germany in 1944, they were a machine, not a warring tribe, a machine, precise, lethal, and perfectly disciplined. Allen had not changed. He had simply proved that what the bureaucracy mistook for chaos was actually choice. He had always known how to enforce discipline. He had simply judged, in North Africa and Sicily, that his men needed something else from him. He was right then, and he was right in Germany. Theodore Roosevelt Jr., too old, too arthritic, too heartsick for the standards of a healthy man half his age, somehow talked his way onto the first wave of the Utah beach landings. June 6, 1944. D-Day. He is the only general and one of the oldest men in the first wave of any Allied beach assault. His cane, his bad heart, his grin. The landing craft deposit his men 300 yards from their intended zone, drifted by currents into the wrong position entirely. Most commanders in that moment would have frozen, would have radioed for clarification, would have waited. Roosevelt looked at the beach, looked at his men, and said, quietly, with the absolute certainty of a man who had spent his whole life preparing for exactly this moment, "We'll start the war from right here." They did. Utah Beach fell. It became the most successful of the 5 D-Day landings, with the fewest casualties. Roosevelt was recommended for the Medal of Honor that very day. 5 weeks later, his heart finally gave out. He died in his sleep on July 12, 1944, in Normandy. The Medal of Honor was awarded posthumously. Eisenhower, years later, reflecting on the relief of Allen and Roosevelt, reportedly admitted it was a terrible injustice. An injustice he had approved, an injustice the system had required. So let us return at the end to the question we began with. Why does a system fire its most successful leaders in the middle of a war? Because the system is not, at its core, designed to win wars. The system is designed to survive, to perpetuate itself, to remain legible, controllable, and immune to the disruption that genuine excellence always introduces. A man like Allen or Roosevelt is not just a great soldier. He is a problem statement. His existence asks a question the institution cannot answer. If the rules don't apply to him, why do they apply to anyone? The system needs fighters, desperately, existentially. Without men like Allen and Roosevelt, there is no breakthrough at El Guitar. There is no Utah Beach. There is, perhaps, no victory at all. But the system cannot be those men, cannot tolerate, long-term, the kind of authority that comes not from rank, but from results, from love, from the terrifying, unchartable loyalty that forms between a leader and men who have bled together. Terry Allen's son, Terry Allen Jr., would command troops in Vietnam. The bond between the Allen name and American infantry ran like a bloodline through the 20th century's wars. Some legacies aren't written in memoirs. They're written in the ground soldiers are willing to take and hold and die on, because somewhere, once, a man looked them in the eye and told them the truth. The greatest leaders in history were rarely the ones the institution chose. They were the ones the institution couldn't stop.